the AllThingsXR podcast. Where you can get the best AR/VR analyzers from the biggest names in the field. Hi everyone, welcome to the AllThingsXR podcast. I'm Mujtaba. In today's episode, we have a conversation with Jake Sally, COO of Jadu. Hi Jake.
How are you doing today?
Thanks very much, Jake. Welcome to the AllThingsXR podcast. Can you tell us more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, pretty winding road, but in a nutshell, I kind of came up in the traditional entertainment space, so I worked in Hollywood for the better part of 4 or 5 years. I kind of had a winding path. I started at a traditional talent agency, not making a ton of money, getting staplers thrown at my head, crazy hours. But what I found is I was working for an agent there who represented these incredible writers and directors, these folks that would start off at something like the Sundance Film Festival and would go on to make movies like Black Panther. Uh-huh. And I went from there to working at Hasbro Studios, which is the entertainment arm of Hasbro, the toy company. So while I was there, I was working for the head of the studio, kind of getting a chance to see how they were taking their core IP, Transformers, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, and developing stories for those different properties across everything from TV, film, digital, new types of games, comic books, mobile games. And it was there while I was at Hasbro that I actually tried my first VR headset. And you kind of have to understand, I was coming up, I grew up in the 90s in Colorado, very idyllic, as idyllic as it gets. And I spent most of my time reading and playing video games. And so when I put on that VR headset, it kind of brought together all of my favorite things in the world, kind of this unlimited imagination that comes with reading predominantly fantasy and the fun, social, interactive nature of video games. And I've been working in, the traditional Hollywood space for a while, and I liked movies, I liked TV, but there wasn't this thing that I was willing to spend all my nights and weekends obsessing over until I found VR. And when I found that, I fell all the way down the rabbit hole. I really started going to as many VR conferences as you could find. And this was, keep in mind, like 2016. So there were only so many of these, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I got so deep into it that I went into winter break and I was like, I had watched Facebook acquire Oculus and I was like, the train is leaving the station. I want to be right at the start of this. I quit my job at Hasbro and I swore to myself I would not take another job unless it was a VR related job. And I was an English major by trade. I've been doing a lot in entertainment, but I was not someone who had a technical background. And I was fortunate enough to land at this company, 2-Bit Circus. And 2-Bit Circus, at that time, they were kind of like Imagineers for hire. So they would get hired by different large companies or countries to come in and make these kind of fantastical things that kind of ranged from one year they made a tequila cloud. They had made all sorts of VR experiences and 360 video experiences. And I was able to join the VR division of that company. And it was the best decision possibly I've made in my life because it let me be surrounded by incredible engineers that really, at a time in XR when most people were saying, don't do this, don't do that, it'll make people sick, etc., they were just saying, we're going to do all of these things so we can engineer our way out of it. And so my perspective on XR has always been, there's always a path forward. There's always a way to make the dream come true. And I worked there for about 2 years, was really kind of bridging traditional entertainment and the engineering firepower of 2-Bit Circus to start putting together a slate of projects that, again, combine like more traditional writers, directors with the engineering and prowess of 2-Bit Circus. And they went in a really interesting direction into building this kind of like micro amusement park, which is a location-based entertainment space for all sorts of things, not just XR. Uh-huh. And for me personally, I love my artists. I'm a slave to the artistry. So there wasn't as much for me to do in that type of setting. So I ended up leaving and going to work at RYOT, which was Verizon Media and Verizon's kind of like content innovation arm. And they were really interesting as well because they had domain expertise in the world of 360 video and were really, really interested in expanding that into other types of content that still fit under the banner of immersive. And I was coming from having done really some of the craziest things that have been done at the time in the XR space. And so I came in, I had a lot of reservations about 360 video. I had watched us stitch together all sorts of projects and really knew that, you know, the juice isn't really worth the squeeze in most cases for 360. There's almost always a better way to shoot it 2D. And they knew that, I knew that. And so we kind of sat down to think, okay, what's the best approach here? And honestly, all credit to RYOT's CEO of the time and co-founder, Bryn Muser. I came in and I proposed a pretty outrageous idea, which was, look, we should take almost all of our production financing that we're putting towards creating these 360 videos. And I'm telling you, it's like they had shot all over the world. They had shot in war zones, underwater, everything. And my proposal was, look, there is a collection of insanely talented artists that are pouring blood, sweat, and tears into virtual, like 6-stop virtual reality experiences, augmented reality experiences. They're taking these projects 90% of the way there. All they need is that extra 10%, and we can provide that. And the pitch was, let's take all of our internal production funding and distribute it to artists and their projects. And through that, we'll be able to build out a slate of content and really learn, where is this medium going next? Because it's definitely not 360 video.
I agree.
And so we had, honestly, one of the best times of my life. We got to work with all sorts of incredible artists. And that kind of, we did every project under the sun. We did multi-episode virtual reality pieces. We did historical recreations where we took photogrammetry scans of like Nelson Mandela's prison cell and let people step back in time and history. We did multi-part episodic experiences created entirely in tilt brush with motion capture to bring those avatars to life. And one of those things that we did was we invested a small amount in a college student from Pakistan named Asad J. Malik. And he had this augmented reality experience that blew my mind. And we've been doing a lot of investing in the virtual reality space. But I really hadn't found a good AR project, one that I could feel confident was kind of taking things in the right direction. There were a lot of technical pipelines we could explore. And he kind of emerged onto the scene and with, 3 other college students had really begun to build one of the most cerebrally interesting projects I've ever seen, called Terminal 3. And Terminal 3, the setup was, it was a HoloLens-based project. No one was making interesting content for the HoloLens. It was all enterprise.
Yeah,
Except for him. And I don't really even know how he got his hands on a HoloLens, honestly. He was in a small, liberal arts school in Vermont called Bennington College. I think through his, architecture department. And what he did is he was doing volumetric capture of a lot of perceived Muslim Americans. And he was doing these interviews. So he would do a 2-hour-long interview with them. He would record all of it, and he would cut it up into this kind of branching narrative. And you would put on the HoloLens and take on the perspective of basically a TSA security, airport officer who was interrogating someone. And I think part of the genius of this was the person you were interrogating, really. They started off very digitized. You couldn't really see them as human. It was almost as like you were looking at them through a scanner. And he had set up this very clever decision matrix where if you asked questions that were what you would expect from a security officer, where are you from, where are you going, they remained in this kind of abstracted digital ghost almost. But if you asked more human questions, they began to appear more human.
Interesting.
If you ask them, what's that tattoo that you have? What are you excited about when you get to America? And this kind of visual divergence based on what you choose to do, I still think it's one of the most interesting and compelling experiences. And so this experience went on to the Tribeca Film Festival. We were able to come on as producers of the project. It toured all over the world. It's taught presently at UC Berkeley and USC. And it was really the start of a very long and ongoing now relationship with Asad, where back in February, he asked me if I would come join his company, Jadu, which is where I presently work, which at the time was really focused on making short form volumetric video, really holograms that people could put into their space, 15, 20-second clips of different performers. These could be musicians like Lil Nas X. These could be influencers, like digital influencers like Josh Richards. It was a pretty wide range. And so that's kind of like I don't want to keep going too far into the Jake saga, but like the umbrella of it really sits under this idea of like, I've done a lot of reflection over the course of quarantine to really think about like, because it is kind of a crazy path, right? There isn't like a natural logical progression to it.
Exactly.
And I really was just following my passions of the time. But what I realized is really the narrative thread to all this is this idea of complex problem solving. I love it. I love complex problems. And when I started, it was the complexity of storytelling and how do you get an emotional reaction out of people. And as time has gone on, that's really maintained. The difference is it's transitioned into what's the best medium, which can range from TV, film, digital, VR, AR, NFTs, as we'll see in a second. But also, why is that the best medium, and how can technology improve it, the way that those stories are told?
Exactly.
So that's kind of the saga in a nutshell.
Great, thanks very much, Jake.
Yeah.
So, what is Jadu?
Yeah, Jadu is the definitive Web3 augmented reality platform, and what that really means is there are increasingly more and more NFT collections that are 3D. And there are a couple platforms that exist out in the world that give you an opportunity to play with NFTs and do some sort of interaction game that kind of ranges from like the Sandbox to Decentraland. Many of these places are constrained to desktop or virtual reality, or alternatively are constrained in terms of the visual style, which again makes sense as you're building a platform in some ways where you're like, look, we want everything to look voxel, or, you can tell what Fortnite, I would argue, as a platform is like, everything looks like a Fortnite thing. For us, what's been really important is there are all of these different communities that are being created. Like NFT collections are really forming communities. Community is the buzzword in my mind of 2021. At least within the crypto world, crypto community.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of, what's happening is this entire space is kind of like being dispersed into all these separate places. And it's really hard for some of these communities to come together. And like, as a growing collector, and for a lot of people that are collectors, your cerebral bandwidth is kind of getting maxed out because every single one of these communities is building their own like siloed thing, right? And it's hard for there to be kind of too many interactions between them. And what we're trying to build with Jadu in part is twofold. One, a place where all of these communities can actually come together. And we're most interested in 3D. 2D NFTs are awesome, but it's not the most interesting thing to do with augmented reality necessarily. Again, I can imagine very easily support there. You can put your 2D NFT on a wall. Looks great. Awesome. But what's more interesting is what we've been working really hard on over the last couple of months is completely rebuilding the app, which was an augmented reality app for short form holograms and is becoming an augmented reality app that allows you to take your 3D NFT collections and turn them into playable characters in augmented reality. So that's a big part of it. And what's nice about the way we're structuring it is, we're as happy having a voxel character in our world as we are having a, more photorealistic character, a more wacky character. Again, 2D collections, we want these to all be able to coexist in what we're calling the Mirrorverse, which is really the augmented reality manifestation of the metaverse, right? coming from having done really like 40 plus XR projects, I know a couple things with pretty firm conviction. People are starting to come around to VR, but the timeline for that is definitely extended. And in the world of augmented reality, headset-based AR, whenever it comes out in like a really meaningful consumer-facing way, is great. But in the short term, mobile AR is where it's at, and the hardware capabilities of mobile devices, it's getting really good.
Yeah.
And so we were used to doing, Austin and I have done a couple AR projects, as I mentioned earlier, that have kind of done all the things you're supposed to do. The most, I would argue, success you can have with AR, headset-based AR, we did it. It was great, but we still only reached tens of thousands of people. And, when we dropped the Lil Nas X hologram, we reached 150,000 people, probably more than we'd ever reached with all of our headset-based AR projects combined. So the scale capabilities of mobile is still, it's too rich to pass up. And the metaverse, wherever it heads, I don't think people are going to want to spend all day sitting and doing things. And this is coming from a gamer. I'm in New York right now doing, we had some board meetings and whatnot. I brought my PlayStation with me. I love playing video games, but I couldn't imagine being constrained to just being seated and that being the only way I can really participate with all of these digital assets that I'm purchasing, worlds I want to explore. I need to have the flexibility to do it on the go. So really, really excited about kind of where we're headed. We're, what is today? Friday? Yeah, next Friday we'll be launching the rebranded and restructured Jadu app. So it's going to be a really exciting moment.
That's great. Also, Jadu means in some languages magic, like Farsi, for example.
In Urdu, yeah.
In order, also my Farsi is my native language. It also means magic. Yeah, these languages are similar somehow.
Which I honestly, I love that element of it. Again, I'm an English major, so the idea of words having power is really important. And I think for this, it can't feel like a tech demo. We've done lots of tech demos, but I think like Terminal 3 and subsequent works, like really what's been powerful is there's a real emotion tied to some of this stuff. And I think AR is hitting that point where it's becoming indistinguishable from magic, right?
Yeah.
In certain ways. But there hasn't been like it's been really hard to incentivize and give people the use case for augmented reality in a way that isn't just for a face filter, right? Like right now, AR is at this point where their filters are awesome in some ways and horrible in other ways. They're great because it's exposing lots and lots of people to the fundamental concept of spatial content, right? Things that can be placed in your real world, can have occlusion, can be mapped over your actual physical clothing. And like all of those things, there's like, someone's got to flip that switch. And I'm glad that it's been happening. But what's going to happen is, now what, right? Every AR experience can't be 15 seconds. It can't just be a filter with the intention of really delivering, like the moment you open your phone, open whatever app is providing the short form AR, the end result cannot always be thinking in terms of a 2D photo or video. That's sad. That's really sad.
Exactly.
It has to be that you want to live in 3D. And that's what we're building. And this kind of rich AR that we're talking about is being able to place multiple 3D objects and have them have relationships with each other, which maybe is a good place to jump into jetpacks if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, of course. We'll get to that. So, Jake, as you said, Jadu is working on a metaverse. What is your definition of metaverse and what is Jadu's role in it?
So we're building a mirrorverse, which I do think there's a small distinction there. I think down the road, the intention is definitely for this to be an interactive and interoperable world where you can take assets from any of your different spaces, bring them into another world, and play, shop, whatever your soup du jour is. I think having done enough of this now to know is you're like, look, there are someone with an astronomical amount of resources is going to have to solve the interoperable problem, right? Like if I build an asset in Unity, all of those textures and shaders and, the bone structure for different 3D assets, it doesn't naturally like magically translate into an Unreal Engine experience or mobile experience. Like there's still layers of friction that have to be solved. For us, that layer of friction that we're focused on solving is how do you just put it into augmented reality and have it be clean and easy to use in the short term. Longer term, we have, and I've always had grand ambitions in terms of like when we say the definitive Web3 AR platform, we really mean it. Like we're seeing a lot of folks that are, I think, doing things slightly backwards in terms of they want to raise a bunch of money and then start making AR platforms versus really, again, we've done enough at this point to know the best way to make an AR platform is to make an AR platform. It's not to raise a bunch of money. And you have to both understand the history of where AR has been, what's been possible on headset, what's becoming possible on mobile, to really start testing that. And that's we launched our Discord a couple weeks ago. Maybe it's about a month ago now. It's been one of the best experiences of my life because we have like basically we're going to have dedicated playtesters who can not only call out bugs, can offer product features, and having this like instantaneous feedback loop is going to be amazing. And we love our Discord. Honestly, it's like maybe we're spending too much time in it, but it's letting us fundamentally think about as more communities are coming in, because as an aggregator, really, as a platform that's bringing lots of communities together, it's a pretty tricky situation to think through, which is, okay, what is the best way in which all of these communities, which have their own style, their own memes, their own vernacular, how are they all going to coexist in Jadu? Whether it's our Discord or whether it's the app itself, what is the way that we can really feel like we're bringing people together? And that idea of magic and everyone feeling like they're really explorers in this new Mirrorverse is part of that. And I think the Mirrorverse, as we're thinking about it, we want to bring the magic into your everyday life, right? I think people are more and more heads down, kind of like getting isolated. And the beauty of this is hopefully that it's going to reignite that kind of passion and desire to be curious and reflect and really have moments of wonder, regardless of if they're in their apartment or if they're out in the mountains. I'm from Colorado, so I've had these kind of like moments of like real wonder. I think that you can have these like aha moments, like when you're in the mountains, the sun's setting and everything, you're like, but everyone doesn't have the ability to just kind of like, gallivant off into the mountains. How can we bring that experience to you in your room, wherever you are? And I think too is, we have obviously as a platform, it's going to have to be social. And that's, I think, a part of it too, that's really interesting that we're starting to think through.
Okay, great. So Jake, I think there's no need to mention about NFT craze right now, but as you said, Jadu is taking a different approach by introducing NFTs in AR. How do you think these two technologies can complement each other?
Totally. I think the beautiful thing right now is, one of the things that's most time consuming when I was making any of my projects is just the time it takes to make the assets, right? The beautiful, like truly amazing part of what's happening in the NFT space is there is an avalanche of assets being made. And these assets are art, these assets are NFTs. And people are really, I think there's definitely a handful of cash grabs, but there are also plenty of like really detailed, really well thought out, beautiful collections that are starting to come out with, real community drivers behind them. And for us, we want to provide the utility and tools for those things to go even further, right? A lot of the teams that are building these collections, they have incredible artists, they have incredible blockchain devs. What they don't necessarily have, nor should they have, is a dedicated team that spent 5 years just every day staying up late thinking about how does AR work? What's going to feel good in augmented reality? Yeah. And we do have that. And what we want to provide really, and what we've been having great success with, honestly, I've done business development and partnerships and things for a long time. And I don't think I've ever had such an easy sell in my life, right? Which is you talk with a team that's building 3D NFTs and you say, look, do you want to have your community be able to play with them in augmented reality? Do you want to have more items and things that they can share and play and do kind of crazy things? The answer is always yes. How could it be anything but? And yeah, do you want it on mobile? Yes, of course. So that's really where we see ourselves, is really acting as an enabler to let people's collections now exist in AR, and then really creating this like horizontal layer of utility across NFT collections and communities that add even more fun and interesting interaction. So, for example, should we get into jetpacks, or we can hang it pull up?
Yeah, sure. Let's go.
Yeah. So we wanted to really, I think, what was clear to us is we had to build it to show people what are we talking about here, because it's kind of there's some cognitive leaps you have to kind of go on to get there. So for us, when we talk about utility and tools, that for us, one of the first things was, okay, we're bringing these different 3D NFT collections into AR, making them playable characters. You have like a digital joystick, you can walk around with your character. That alone, mind-blowing to lots of folks, right? Yeah. When their options are really like, I can hold it in my crypto wallet, I can have it as my profile picture, pretty much not a lot of other things to do with it. And again, there are teams that are building out really interesting, like real life use cases and whatnot. But for us, one of those was like, look, you can just play with it in AR. So when we thought about, okay, what is that utility or that tool that's going to be really fun and interesting? We kind of almost immediately, weirdly, landed on jetpacks, because we wanted to add a new form of transportation and like movement mechanic. And instead of being able to move horizontally, being able to move vertically. So we kind of started building these jetpacks with that express intention, and one of the most fun development periods of my life. Seriously, very rarely. It was fun to kind of like talk with my parents, like, yeah, I'm building jetpacks for augmented reality NFTs. They're like, what are you saying to us? But so what ended up happening is we released kind of 1,111 of these jetpacks. There's kind of a scale of rarity associated with these. There's kind of 60%, which were the standard white jetpack. We had 30%, which were like the dark mode black jetpack with some kind of fun stickers on them. And then we partnered with this incredible person named Trippy, who's kind of like cultivated over the course of a number of years a community tied really around psychedelic art. And then we'd actually hidden as like a fun Easter egg for everyone, a 1-of-1 jetpack, which was a gold jetpack. And we didn't tell anyone about this until after all the jetpacks sold. And it, I think it was a really fun thing for our community to be like, hey, everyone kind of knows the stakes. And we're like, actually, one of you is sitting on truly a gold mine. Community went crazy. It was really, really fun. But the jetpack sale we were doing as almost like a test to see, we knew it was fun functionality in AR. We hadn't really established our launch date for our app at that point, but we had pretty firm belief that it was going to be something that would go moderately well, if not like pretty well. It ended up really wildly exceeding our expectations. It was the #1 trending collection on OpenSea after launch. It sold out in 20 seconds. Like Asad, he went to, the mint went live. He clicked mint. He went back to our Discord to say, hey, the mint is live. And he came back and his transaction failed because it sold out already. And, this was, I think for us, the way we structured it was everyone who gets a jetpack, they don't actually know what they've got. And we're going to reveal them in 24 hours or so. And because of that, there was this period between when someone bought it and when they knew what they had that, the trading was kind of crazy. It was really like the highest pre-reveal floor in NFT history, where people had such value on this because there wasn't anything like this where you could say, hey, not only do I have an interesting piece of art, which, we've got, this is something that is, the 3D files are minted on chain where it's like you're actually getting the thing that you're supposed to be getting, but also that imminently you're about to have a mobile app that's going to support this and let you do fun things with it. So the value proposition is, I think, really, really good for something like this. Mm-hmm. And it's been fun to start talking with all these different collections and start seeing now that we've done the bigger technical lift of creating a system that lets us very quickly and easily allow these different 3D collections to come into our app and be playable characters. Now we get into the really fun part, which is starting to think about what are our future drops going to be? What other types of utility can we bring to these collections and creators? And we're really excited to see, honestly, the creative chaos that ensues as people, are able to take their assets into AR and play with them. And what does that mean? And I think there's going to be this kind of domino effect as it unlocks the idea of spatial NFTs. So this is a really good time to talk, honestly. I'm glad we're getting the chance to sit down.
Yeah, of course. So, Jake, Jadu is on ERC 721, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are there any plans to connect Jadoo's smart contracts with other projects as well?
We're always considering. I think what's nice is, we're first and foremost an augmented reality company. So we will kind of continue to evaluate both what chain we're on. Is there a way to kind of like support multiple chains? So that's definitely like an ongoing thing for us. It's a really good question. I don't have like a fantastic answer at this time though.
Great. So Jake, you mentioned also about NFTs and communities. How do you think NFTs shape communities?
It depends on the NFT, honestly. I think, and the team. It really depends on the team. The team leads what the community becomes, and there are a number of collections. Like I think the Bored Ape Yacht Club is probably one of the most interesting. It's got this, and it's interesting. I think mostly because they're really reinvesting the money they're making into the community. Like they just announced their roadmap the other day, which includes everything from blockchain-based mobile games to actually having like a permanent, like in real life facility. It's like a bar or club type setup in Miami that's just for their members. So I am really impressed with them. And I love, they're doing like the inversion of what we're doing, which is they're taking the digital assets and making physical things, and we're saying, look, we're actually bringing your digital assets into the physical world. So there's like different shades of the same color, which is nice. Yeah. I think, the Oniforce collection, I love how they're world building. They really use their collection as like a jumping off point to start both a Discord centered RPG, which is crazy and awesome. As someone who used to play Dungeons and Dragons, I'm obsessed with it. Where community members who have an NFT are actually able to go and they can like really build the lore around their character, participate. They have a couple Discord mods going basically full time that are acting as dungeon masters, like reacting to what people are saying, building different, spaces you can go into, bartering, trading. Like it's robust. They have occasional, like really like story time where they have the creators basically read the lore of the world that's slowly developing. So I think and look, then there are other collections where it's pretty financially centric, which again is like a very reasonable thing. It's just not the most interesting thing. And as we kind of discussed, like I like complex problems, and the idea of how do you build a community in a way that lasts. I think, again, I'm coming from Hollywood. I'm a sucker for artists. So I think the financial incentive is a really, really powerful one. But I think when you can bring together a Venn diagram of financial incentive, art, and emotional, that's when you get to a really interesting thing that I think has permanence. So it's going to be exciting to see how a lot of these start to unfold. Because again, it's iterating really fast, right? There was a moment where, I think this idea of like 10,000, each one's unique profile picture collections, I think are probably not over, but there's definitely exhaustion from the space of it. Like I was looking at like the release schedules, like there's like easily like 5 or 6 coming out like every single day. And it's not, the thing is what's going to set one apart from another one, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is the team and their strategy around it. And I think there will kind of be, maybe not pressure, but I think there will be success for the teams that say, look, we're going to build some of these things first and have like a very, consistent rollout, rather than what a lot of times what happens is, again, you can't bootstrap everything. Like some of these collections are effectively startups, right? Where they're saying, hey, we're selling this collection with the revenue generated from that. We're going to start building X, Y, and Z. I think what'll have to start happening is community members will have this expectation of actually being delivered things on a faster timeline, which that's why we're excited, right? It's like we built the app before we released the jetpacks. It was very easy for us to be like, hey, you got a jetpack 2 weeks from now, you're going to have a mobile AR app that lets you play with all the things. And after that, we're going to have more and more and more, and we don't have to wait to receive the revenue to kind of jump into it. So it's been fun.
Yeah. So, Jake, right now we are very early with technologies like blockchain and NFTs. And I think the use cases are also in their early forms. How do you see NFTs over collectibles, and what are the real use cases that will actually give value to users and actually solve a problem in a later stage and later form?
It's a great question. I think short term, the use cases, it's a much more interesting version of trading stocks, right? You're like, you get community, you get actually interesting art, which heaven forbid that be part of it. I think longer term, one of the things will be, I think like the blockchain gaming space is really interesting. Again, diehard gamer. And I think we're going to definitely look back in 10 years and it's going to be laughable to have any game company think that they can, the value proposition can be like, hey, give me $60, I'll give you a game, the end. Versus, I love Overwatch. I'm very excited for Overwatch to come out. And I've sunk thousands of hours into Overwatch. And to sit there and be like, damn, I could have made probably not like a life-changing amount of money, but a good chunk of cash to have played this game for, at this point, like 5-6 years. That really hurts right now. So I think that's going to be one of the definitely interesting avenues. And as these, games, which are really fundamentally being like, hey, community, perform a function, and you'll get rewarded for it, and that reward will be tied to some sort of finances. What'll start to happen, I think there's potential for, as these communities grow and we kind of like surpass the idea of a 10,000 limiter, and we start getting into 100,000 or, enough collections that of 10,000 that suddenly you're at like, 100,000, a million pieces, and people are bought in, and there is kind of like a pool of resources available to the community can vote on how it's utilized.
Yeah.
That starts to get really interesting. And I we can go as far down the rabbit hole as you want, but I think like fundamentally it can be heading in this direction of really getting to choose the digital nation that you want to participate in, and how that nation chooses to use their resources, whether it's to build a community park for a place where a lot of their communities in one place, or say, look, we're going to buy a bus pass for everyone that has this. Or I'm really interested in like the partnerships level, which is like, how does Bored Ape Yacht Club like decide to partner with New York City and be like, everyone who's a Bored Ape Yacht Club member also gets a Metro pass, for life, or whatever it's going to be. That starts getting cool. Now you're like, oh, like, okay, they're incentivizing people to actually mobilize on the planet and move and use transportation in ways that are not, may not be their first choice, but there's a reward mechanism that is going to let them do that. And look, You're right, which is we are early. I feel like in 9 months, it's completely molted and gone through a whole like 10-year cycle already.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, it really, I mean, where do you think what do you think? I'm fascinated now where you think it's headed.
Yeah, Jake, I think collectibles are a good thing and a good start, and they shape communities. Also, NFTs in game industry will be huge, I think. But the greatest manifestation of NFTs, I think, will be in metaverses, where we will actually need to define ownership and manage simulations. I think they will be huge, huge in metaverses in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that idea of digital identity, honestly, just ownership, right? Yeah, I'm curious to see how the larger companies handle this because I think there is like a philosophical difference in approach between
Yeah.
the NFT kind of crypto underground and a lot
Yeah.
of these established things that like it's going to be hard I think for some of them to transition. They're just like their business models are not set up to really work with
Exactly.
everyone owning
Exactly.
their own stuff. So yeah, that I very curious.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jake, we mentioned some of the good value propositions of NFTs, like shaping communities, but NFTs, I think, sometimes also reflect some bad virtues, like bragging and status signaling, which I think are not good traits. What do you think about that, and how we can solve it if you agree with me on this?
Love that question. I I think humans definitely to a certain degree. I'm not saying it's a 90-10, but I think inherently they love to really show who they are, and your individuality can often be an amalgamation of the things you choose. And
Yeah.
in this case, you know, some of those things are becoming NFTs and I think, like, does an NFT represent like are these like the Gucci bags of the future? I don't think they are. I think they're a lot closer to. I don't want to say religions. I really don't. I think there's a
Religions
shared.
are also a community.
They are, and it's tied around a shared ethos and different levels of different perspectives, right? Like that's
Yeah.
fundamentally what it boils down to. And I don't think there's necessarily something wrong with that. I think it's just a question of how loud is the microphone that they're using. It's always fine for
Uh-huh.
someone to, you know, tip tap their beat, but I think when it starts to be cacophonous is when it can definitely be frustrating. Um, I think right now, because these collections are so tied to folks' finances, that for a lot of people that are in this space, there's definitely folks that are coming from a wealthier background that are in this, but I think there are a lot of people where this has already been fundamentally life changing and people want to talk about that. And I'm just like every day it's someone's been able to afford a house, or they've been able to pay off their student loans.
Mm-hmm.
And having, I paid off, I'm 32 or 31, is like I paid off my student loans probably like 2 years ago, and I was very fortunate in kind of like my college tuition package is like I would scream that from the tallest mountain for as long as possible, especially if it was because I had been clever enough to get into this space early and had a bunch of great art that I loved. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I have a younger brother who's like a decade younger than me, so there's always this like really interesting generational divide.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to educate him on this and really trying to get him to understand like how this kind of like titanic shift is happening. And I think for a lot of these young folks that are frustrated with how a lot of things are, having like a mechanism to be both technically savvy, artistic, and change their lives is, I don't know if we're going to get away from the virtue signaling side of it anytime soon, but I think hopefully it transitions from, hey, I have this piece of expensive art to, hey, I'm in this great community. Let me tell you about it. And the art is really the admission ticket in some of those cases for that.
Great. Jake, you mentioned earlier about NFT's role in funding startups. Do you think NFTs can be a serious alternative to ICOs and VC investments to help startups fund themselves?
I think so. I think it just depends. Again, for me, this gets back to a little bit to the team and what they're going to do with it. I think, the benefit of like institutional investors is they can provide a lot of infrastructure. And for some of these teams that are not necessarily like trying to build a product in the sense of like something they're shipping, but are building a product in the sense of like almost like a weird subscription, like club/subscription.
Yeah.
I think they can provide. There's a ton of value that can come from that. Whether it's, I think a lot of the bigger firms definitely have like their finger on the pulse, both in Washington and kind of like legally of understanding. It's one thing to launch a collection; it's another to be like, what are the tax implications of this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is definitely one place a lot of education needs to happen extremely quickly for everyone. Every time I see someone buying a Tesla, I'm like, oh my God, please tell me you saved money for taxes on whatever chunk you just liquidated into fiat. Please, please, please tell me that happened. So I think it's a really nice alternative route. I think it definitely to kind of go with like a token sale can be great. It definitely allows you to maintain more of the equity. It allows you to really control your own destiny, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? It's super volatile versus having really like cash in the bank, which, I think what Bitcoin and Ethereum went down a chunk today is like, that'd be scary. If you're a company that has a burn rate and suddenly you've lost 10% of the money that you had. And again, it kind of, that's the rodeo you're choosing to ride a little bit with all this space, which can be, there's high upside, there's potential catastrophic downside. But I think I've definitely felt this way at large, is that it's very hard. The best things you can have usually are control, right? One of the best.
Yeah.
Control and stability. Usually those don't go together, but sometimes they can. And so I think a lot of the models will start getting fine-tuned as we see what's working, what's not working. The complexity, honestly, blends of the two will start to happen, where you have a VC that maybe is like, look, I'm going to give you a cash injection, but I want a portion of those token sales. And you're like, that's great. I would love to see more things like that developing.
Yeah, me too. So Jake, as of our last question, how do you see the future of NFTs and AR?
I mean, I know exactly, and this is a very skewed perspective, but I think these will be moving more and more into 3D. I think the age of 2D NFTs, by and large, especially as we think about like it being a representation of a person, it's moving into 3D. I think it's going to be very hard to go back. Again, there will still be a place for 2D NFTs, but they will be more, I think, in the art world, right? There are some really interesting like NFT RPG like type thing. Like there will be a whole Dungeons and Dragons type subset of NFTs, but and I think there will start to be a lot more mechanics as people figure out, like right now, to get whitelisted or participate, if you don't have the financial resources, it's like a growth hack marketing setup where you're like, hey, retweet this, post this, invite X people to Discord. It's fine. It's just boring, right? It's very Web 2 mindset. It works great for Web 2, and it's working like pretty well right now in Web 3, the beginnings of it, but it's not the most interesting thing you can do. And I think for us, looking at this is how can you get people to do more interesting things? Again, walk 5 miles and you get whitelisted. Much better. So helpful to everyone. And it levels the playing field in a way that right now, like my Discord's basically unusable. I've got like 200,000 spam DMs, and it's just like I think a lot of people are just getting, again, burnt out on that mentality. It's like if you're not on Discord 10 hours a day, like you're missing. The amount of FOMO is toxic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think these things will start to stabilize in some ways, and I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work, really being like, look, it's not about being part of every single drop. It's about figuring out like what are the communities that you actually align with, whether it's spiritually, mentally, physically, if it's in a specific location, and helping build them. And the wealth generation comes out of it really growing and sustaining over time, more so than you making a quick buck and taking the mint price, flipping it for 20x at 2 ETH and kind of just like walking away from it, which again, it's a reasonable way to do it, but it's not, I think it's very unsustainable unless you're kind of coming from the world of like day trading, what you love doing. And it doesn't, it's not as rewarding. You want to see like the teams that are great, you want to see them succeed. You want to help them succeed. Like even,
exactly.
Like for us in Jadu, like the memes that we see coming from our Discord, it's so rewarding. It's awesome. And it makes us be like, yeah, we're going to like work harder. Like they deserve it. The community deserves it. This is great. So I think the feedback loops have to become more two-way versus right now it's just a lot.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, Jake, thanks very much for joining the AllThingsXR podcast. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, of course, man. Great question. Seriously, thank you.